Have you ever woken up and found out you owe nearly $900,000 because of your parents? That's what happened to me. A 5-bedroom dream house showed up on my credit report, but I never signed for it. On paper, I owned it. In reality, I didn't even know it existed. The scariest part? The signature was mine, perfectly forged, by the same woman who taught me cursive, my mom. The truth is, it wasn't some scammer who stole my identity. It was my own family. I'm not a lawyer. I'm just someone who thought helping family meant saying yes, until that yes became a massive mortgage in my name. In this video, I'll show you how I discovered the fraud, the exact steps I took to protect myself, and how you can too. Even if you've never been in a courtroom, you have more power than you think. I took the forged documents to court. I stood across from my parents. And I won. I got my name and my future back. If someone close to you has access to your info and something feels off, don't stay silent. Every day you wait is a day they might sign something else in your name. Watch this video. It might be the shield you didn't know you needed. Before we dive into the story, I'd love to get to know you a little better. Drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from. That way I can send you a special shout out. Now let's begin our story together. I was supposed to be on the phone with a mortgage officer finalizing the biggest decision of my adult life. Instead, I ended the call with my heart in my throat and someone else's house tied to my name. Dad always used to say, "Nothing's really yours until you've paid for it twice." Back then, it was just one of his jokes, part of his thrift store wisdom arsenal. But today, it landed differently. Today, it sounded like a warning. It was a Thursday afternoon in early March 2022. Portland was still holding on to winter, the kind that pressed a chill into your skin, no matter how many layers you wore. I was seated in my favorite corner of a small co-working space in Northwest 3rd booth from the espresso machine, where the scent of cinnamon rolls clung to the air, and no one bothered you unless you forgot to silence your Slack. I had my laptop open. Highlighters, color-coded folders spread out like a well-meaning but over-prepared student. Condo brochures, interest rate comparisons, a spreadsheet named New Beginnings, XLSX. This was going to be my fresh start. Until it wasn't. "Ms. Linwood, thank you for your application," Mr. Perkins said, his voice tinny through my earbuds. "We appreciate your interest in First Elm Mortgage, but unfortunately we're unable to proceed." I sat up straighter. Sorry, what I thought everything was in order. My credit's excellent. I don't have any major debt. There was a pause. "That's the issue," he said carefully. "Your debt-to-income ratio is unusually high. We're seeing a mortgage balance of $890,000 from Heritage First Bank." The coffee cup in my hand trembled slightly. "That's not possible," I said slowly. "I've never taken out a mortgage." He hesitated. "Would you like me to email you the credit report we pulled?" I nodded before realizing he couldn't see me. "Yes, please." The report came within seconds. The subject line, "Confidential credit pull for R. Linwood," felt like it belonged to a stranger. I opened it with the same dread you feel before a medical diagnosis, hoping for a mistake, praying for a glitch. But there it was, my legal name, my social security number, my date of birth, and right beneath it, a single mortgage loan. Originated August 12, 2021. Heritage First Bank. Balance $890. Seasonalers? I sat frozen, the cursor blinking in the corner of my screen like it too was waiting for an explanation. Grabbing my phone, I opened a text thread with Nina. "Rachel, you will not believe this. There's a mortgage in my name, $890K. Heritage First." She replied almost immediately. "Nina." "Hold on, Heritage. That's your parents' bank, right?" Yes, it was. I remembered the blue folders on my mom's kitchen counter, the way she'd talked about locking in a rate before it changed. "This new place is a real step up," Dad had said last summer. "Finally got the wraparound porch your mom always wanted." I never asked how they pulled it off. I minimized the email window and opened a new browser tab, Zillow. My hands were clammy, my mouth dry. I typed in the only address I remembered from their moving announcement, the one they sent out in the family group chat, with a photo of the house and the caption, "Our new chapter begins here." It loaded slowly, painfully. 5 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms, brick facade, Spanish tile roof. The kind of house you post about, the kind of house people host Thanksgiving in. And at the bottom of the listing, right, where it listed the ownership deed, it said Rachel Linwood. It was like being punched without the bruising. I scrolled, hoping there was a logical explanation hiding in the fine print, but logic had long since left the building. I looked around the co-working space. Nothing had changed. The girl at the front was still fixing the froth on her cappuccino. The guy near the window was still taking Zoom calls in his obnoxiously loud voice. But for me, everything had changed. That house, the one they proudly showed off, was legally mine, at least on paper. I didn't know whether to laugh, cry, or call a lawyer. Instead, I stared at the screen, willing it to undo itself. Then I remembered something else. A fleeting comment from my mom last Christmas over pecan pie. Isn't it funny how family always works things out in the end? That pie felt like betrayal now. I looked back at the Zillow tab. There was the photo of their front door painted red like always, and there was the chain. Only this time it was tied to me. It wasn't just the debt, it was the signature. The one in flowing ink under a contract I'd never seen. It was mine, only it wasn't. I sat in the corner of a Starbucks on Hawthorne Steam, rising from a cappuccino I forgot to sip. My laptop was open, but my focus was on a pile of documents I'd printed at the office that morning. Mortgage disclosures, the deed of trust, something called a HUD-1 that might as well have been written in Latin, and then page 12. There it was again, Rachel E. Morgan. Slanted deliberate. A signature that looked a little too perfect. My hand didn't move like that. Not anymore. I pulled out my own file of scanned forms from work, NDAs, my lease, old tax returns. I stared at the way I signed things, now rushed loops, inconsistent angles, a tendency to smudge the tail end of the R. None of that was here. I highlighted the signature line on the mortgage. Then I highlighted mine. Then the other. The more I compared, the more something inside me twisted. My mom used to drill me with cursive flashcards when I was 8. She'd hover over my shoulder like a hawk and correct every backward S. Your signature is your future, she'd say. I thought she meant jobs, credit cards, college applications. Not this. I took a long sip of my now lukewarm cappuccino and dialed the number for Heritage First Bank Thumb, hovering for a second before pressing call. A woman picked up after 3 rings. Heritage First. This is Denise. How can I help you? I steadied my voice. Hi, yes. I need to verify a mortgage that appears on my credit report. It's showing up under my name, but I never authorized it. Certainly let me look that up for you. May I have your social security number? I gave it. I shouldn't have known it by heart, but I did. Years of being the responsible one trains you for things like this. There was a pause, then a soft click of typing. Okay. I do see a mortgage under Rachel E. Morgan, closed March of last year, $890,000 loan current address. I didn't take that out, I interrupted too quickly. I've never even lived there. Another pause. Well, ma'am, the application used your full name, social security number, and employer at the time. It included a signed authorization. I closed my eyes, pinching the bridge of my nose. Is there any way you can send me a copy of the application packet? I asked. I can email it over. One moment. I waited with my heart in my throat. Outside the window, people passed by with their dogs and eco-friendly shopping bags. Life looked so normal out there. A ding came from my inbox. The file was there. I clicked and the screen filled with legalese and fake familiarity. In the signature section, mine again. I stared at the digital ink. There was no pixel drag, no blur, just a clean scan. But something was wrong. I zoomed in. The signature floated ever so slightly above the line, and the stroke pattern, it repeated. Exactly. Like someone had copied it from one form and pasted it onto another. I felt bile rise in my throat. Nina slid into the seat across from me without warning. "You texted 911, she said, setting down a croissant. "What's going on?" I turned the screen toward her. "This mortgage. It's under my name." "But I didn't sign for it." She leaned in, reading. "Wait, this is your parents' address, right?" "Yeah." Her brows knit. "And they just moved in there last year, right? After selling the old place." I nodded. My fingers were trembling. Nina exhaled slowly. "Rachel, someone didn't just steal your identity. Someone you know did this. Dear friend, what would you do if you were in my shoes? I bet you can't guess what's coming next. But before we go any further, drop a 5 in the comments if you're still with me, because what happens next might just leave you speechless." I blinked hard. No, it has to be a mistake. Maybe the banks don't accidentally assign a mortgage. This was coordinated. She reached over, tapping the screen. "Look at this notary seal. Do you recognize the name?" I squinted. "R. Fielding." Nina raised her eyebrows. "Isn't that the guy from your dad's golf club?" My stomach dropped. I hadn't thought of that. Richard Fielding. Always wore polos 2 sizes too tight. Gave me a weird little nod when I saw him with Dad last summer. I fumbled through the other pages trying to anchor myself. Okay. Maybe I gave them access accidentally. I did co-sign that Parent Plus loan for Ella's undergrad. Maybe they reused something, Nina said gently. That's not how loans work. And even if they had some old paperwork, it wouldn't include your current employer and income details. My voice was thin. I don't understand. She folded her arms. Start writing down every time you gave them financial info, every login, every tax return you filed from their house, anything. I reached for my folder again, but my hand shook. The pen trembled against the paper. I was building a list, but every item felt like a memory turned against me. On a hunch, I called an old friend who worked at the city assessor's office. I didn't even plan the words, I just blurted, "Can you look up who owns 3187 Jasper Ridge Drive?" She took a second. "It's under Rachel E. Morgan." I closed the folder slowly. The signature wasn't the worst part. It was how many people had helped them do it. The lasagna was still bubbling in the pan when I walked in, and for one stupid second, I thought maybe they hadn't done it after all. The kitchen smelled like garlic and butter and something sweet from the oven, like Sundays used to. Not perfect, but familiar. I almost let my coat hang on the back of the old chair like muscle memory. But the mortgage papers tucked in my purse scratched against my side, and the weight of that truth made my fingers tighten instead. Mom turned from the stove, a wooden spoon in her hand, and that same tight bun high on her head, like she always wore when company came over. "Rachel, we thought you were still in Bend this weekend." "I changed my plans," I said, forcing a smile. "Hope that's all right." "Of course it is." Her eyes darted to Dad, who was pouring red wine into the good glasses. "We've got plenty." Aunt Claire waved from the dining table. "I was just telling them about my nasturtiums blooming early this year. Global warming's good for something, I guess." I smiled at her genuinely for a moment. Aunt Claire had always been harmless. She didn't know. Dad raised his glass. "You made it just in time. You always had perfect timing, Rach." I sat down, trying not to look at the silver napkin rings or the matching plates. All new. Paid for by me, I guessed. Dinner moved forward like a script. Garlic bread passed, jokes recycled. Aunt Claire praised Mom's sauce, and Dad leaned back like a man who never lost sleep. I nodded and chewed and waited every bite heavier than the last. Then dessert came. Tiramisu. My favorite. That almost made me cry. I cleared my throat and reached for my purse. I brought something, I said, pulling out the envelope and sliding it onto the table. Mom froze mid-sip. Dad's eyes flicked to the top page, bold letters, Heritage First Bank, and then back to his wine. "What's this?" he asked too casually. "It's the mortgage statement," I said, "for this house, in my name." Aunt Claire blinked and tilted her head. "Your name, Rachel Elaine Morgan," I said. "Social Security number, signature, all there. Silence." Then Mom spoke. "You always said you'd help us get settled." "Help," I repeated. "You forged my name. You filed documents I never saw." Dad shrugged. "It was the market, honey. We had to move fast. You didn't call. You didn't ask. You just took it." "Don't be dramatic," Mom said, her voice sharper now. "We were going to tell you, after things stabilized." I stared at her. I talked to the notary. He works at Dad's golf club. He said he witnessed my signature while I was supposedly out of state. "That's not how we wanted it to go," Dad said. "But the timing was tight. We had no choice." "You had every choice," I snapped. "You just didn't think I'd find out." Mom stood and started clearing plates. "Can we not do this here? Where else should we do it?" "A courtroom." Aunt Claire looked between us, stunned. "Is this a joke?" "No," I said. "It's theft, and it's real." Dad sighed. "Rachel, you're our daughter. We thought you'd understand." "That's the problem," I said. "You counted on that, on me staying quiet." I stood up and pushed my chair in slowly. My coat was still on the hook. I grabbed at hands, shaking now. Mom followed me to the door. "Rachel, don't make this into something ugly. Please, we'll work it out." But not in front of Claire. I turned. Her face wasn't guilty. It was strategic. "Don't make this public," she whispered. "It'll ruin us all." I stared at her, the mother who taught me to sign my name in perfect loops. "You already did." Outside, the porch lights glowed soft yellow, casting long shadows over the walkway. The air smelled like fresh mulch and jasmine. I walked slowly, not because I didn't want to run, but because I didn't want them to think I was afraid. Not anymore. They didn't make a mistake. They made a choice. And now I was making mine. As I stepped onto the porch, I remembered the first time I helped plant hydrangeas along the front walkway with Mom. I was 11, wearing oversized gloves and a too small sun hat. She told me then, "One day this will all be yours." I thought she meant the garden. The wind picked up. I zipped my coat and kept walking, but the air seemed heavier now, like the house behind me was a weight I hadn't realized I'd been carrying for years. Every Sunday dinner, every chore done without question, every loan co-signed for the family, they'd all been little threads tying me to a version of myself that they built. Dutiful, quiet, useful. I pulled out my phone. Nina's text was still open. "You okay?" I typed back. They admitted it. They actually think it's fine. 3 dots. "Then I'm so sorry. You want me to come over?" I hesitated, staring at the blinking cursor. My thumb hovered, then typed, "No." "Not yet. I need to sit with this first." I reached the end of the block and turned around. Their porch light was still on, glowing like it always had, like it would welcome me back in. But I wasn't going back in. Not until they understood I wasn't theirs to sign away. Not until I decided what came next. Not until I reclaimed what they stole from my name and from me. And I wasn't just talking about the house. I didn't think filing a complaint would feel like betrayal. But walking out of the notary office envelope in hand, it felt like cutting a cord. The sidewalk was slick with drizzle spring rain tapping steadily on my coat. I held the envelope against my chest like it might blow away, like the truth inside needed shelter. Multnomah County Courthouse loomed behind me, tall, gray, and unapologetically square. It didn't matter how many weddings or parking tickets happened inside. Today it was where my parents became defendants, and I plaintiff. Inside had smelled like paper and fluorescent lighting. The county clerk barely looked up as she stamped the date across the affidavit. "You're sure you want this processed?" she asked. "I am," I said. "Okay, you'll get a copy by mail." Click, stamp, file. That was it. The whole room might as well have exhaled. I stepped back into the Portland drizzle and took a long breath that tasted like wet concrete and resolve. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. But I felt something settle in my bones, something that hadn't been there since this whole thing started. Maybe it was permission. Back at my apartment, I opened my laptop and clicked into a Zoom link labeled Legal Consult, Shaw. Nina had referred me. Said Melanie Shaw was young but sharp and didn't tolerate emotional guilt as a strategy. Melanie's face appeared. Black glasses, calm voice, a no-nonsense blouse. "You've already filed the complaint?" she asked. "Yes. Fraudulent mortgage. Identity misuse. I gave the notary's statement too. Good. That gives us footing. I'll need copies of your tax records, your credit report before the loan was taken out, and any written exchanges you've had with your parents. There aren't many. They don't write things down. Then we look at what others have. Notaries, bank officers, title agencies. We rebuild the paper trail backwards. I nodded. Rachel, we're not just talking about reversing a mortgage, she said. We can pursue civil damages, financial restitution. I swallowed. Okay, no rush, but I'll be direct. These cases can fracture families permanently. They already did, I said. Later that afternoon, I met with Detective Karen Doyle. She was calm, kind in the way nurses are detached but not unfeeling. She took my statement, read over my affidavit, and opened a file. Technically, this is first-degree aggravated identity theft, she said, but proving criminal intent will depend on who else was involved. There's a notary seal from someone at my dad's club, I said, and a bank manager who's been family friends for years. Karen nodded. We'll follow up. You'll be notified if charges move forward. When I got home, the envelope from the courthouse sat on the counter. Official, sealed, my name typed under complainant. It felt clinical, but it was mine. As I sat on the Max train ride home, the courthouse envelope on my lap, my reflection in the window looked older than I remembered. Not tired exactly, just stretched thin, like I'd grown 10 years in 10 weeks. A toddler cried across the aisle. The man beside me scrolled through real estate listings on his phone. I looked away. I didn't go straight to my laptop. I brewed tea. Mint the kind Mom used to make when I had a cold. The smell curled around me like memory. I should have thrown the box out months ago, but grief and habit live in the same cupboard. The living room was quiet, only the hum of the fridge keeping me company. I laid out the files, copies of emails from Heritage First Bank, screenshots of text conversations, and the affidavit signed in blue ink. Nina had helped me highlight every date, every discrepancy. Her notes were in orange gel pen, circled signature looks off and asked Melanie if this counts as coercion. I took a photo of the folder and sent it to Nina with a short message. It's official. She replied within seconds. Proud of you. Want Thai later? I smiled for the first time all day. Later that night, I opened the drawer of old keepsakes I hadn't touched in years. Letters from summer camp, my high school diploma, a ribbon from a spelling bee Mom had framed and left on my desk. I stared at the handwriting on a birthday card, her handwriting. The loops in the Y, the tidy R's. The same ones now copied beneath a fraudulent mortgage. I tucked it all away and closed the drawer gently. Some things I wasn't ready to let go of, but I could rearrange where they lived in my story. Before bed, I reread the paperwork one more time. The case number stood out in bold print, 22 CV 4093, not just ink on paper and anchor, something I could point to when I started to doubt myself. I wasn't just reacting, I was acting. For the first time, I wasn't waiting for an apology. I was creating consequences. The rain returned sometime after midnight, pattering gently on the window panes. I pulled the blanket up, phone buzzing one last time with a message from Melanie. Tomorrow we start drafting the civil complaint. Sleep well, and I did. They called me ungrateful, online, in church, at my cousin's baby shower. It didn't happen all at once. At first it was small things. Sideways glances in the office kitchen, a coworker who stopped saving me a seat at lunch. Then came the Facebook posts. Vague scripture quotes about honoring parents, forgiveness, and humility. I knew exactly who they were meant for. Mom never tagged me, of course. That would have been too direct. But her friends sure did. By the time I walked into the baby shower, the whispers had turned into audible commentary. Pink streamers, pastel cupcakes, and under every polite smile, judgment. Aunt Sandy leaned toward her friend and said, "There's Rachel, the one suing her own blood." They made it sound like I'd taken a bat to the family Bible. I smiled anyway. That brittle, tired smile you wear when the ground beneath you is softer than the people around you. Nina squeezed my hand when she saw me standing alone near the punch bowl. "You don't owe anyone here your story," she said, "especially not over a diaper raffle." But I did owe myself something. Clarity. peace. And I wasn't about to find either by pretending I was still welcome in spaces that now felt like performance art. Work didn't help either. My desk neighbor Evan dropped a print job on the wrong tray and muttered, "Guess even lawsuits need toner." I stared at him for a beat longer than necessary. "You know, Evan, if you ever need legal advice, let me know. I'm getting good at it." He flushed and mumbled something about deadlines. It was exhausting being both defendant and villain in a story I didn't even write. Mom had always cared more about appearances than apologies. What will people think, she used to ask if I wore a wrinkled dress to church. Not once did she ask what I thought. And now those people she was so concerned about, they were weaponizing her narrative. I was the disobedient daughter, the troublemaker, the one who couldn't let it go. But Aunt Claire sent me a message one night. "Just one sentence, you're brave. I just wish I had done the same 20 years ago." That message did more for me than any like or comment ever could. Some days I wanted to scream. Other days I just wanted to sleep. I stopped going to brunch with extended family. I left a grocery cart half full once because a church elder started walking toward me. There was a time I would have tried to explain myself, defend my side. Now I didn't owe a performance. Nina let me crash at her place the night the church group chat started lighting up with links about Rachel Morgan's lawsuit. She opened a bottle of wine and let me vent into her throw pillows. "Truth never has perfect PR," she said, "but it lasts longer." We rewatched a rom-com from college. Half the jokes hadn't aged well, but the comfort did. I cried during the happy ending, not because of the movie, because I hadn't seen one in real life for a while. The next morning, I opened a wedding invite, my cousin Emily. It had lavender trim and a photo of her and her fiancé laughing on a beach. Beautiful, soft. But at the bottom, in subtle italics, we kindly ask for no drama or legal matters to be brought into our day of joy. No drama. That was code. That was aimed at me. I stared at it for a long time. Then I tore it clean down the middle, right through the palm trees and the fake sunset. I wasn't going. I didn't need to pretend I was okay with what had happened. I didn't need to sit quietly at a table full of relatives who'd chosen silence over truth. I was done paying the reputation tax. Let them think I was difficult. Let them spin their stories over Sunday potlucks and midweek devotionals. I wasn't the problem. I was the mirror. And they hated what they saw. Later that week, I went back to my apartment alone and found a letter in my mailbox. No stamp. Just a folded piece of cream-colored paper tucked inside. It was from my mother. "I don't know who you've become," it began, "but the girl I raised would never have embarrassed us like this. No apology, no acknowledgement, just shame neatly handwritten in cursive." I folded it carefully and placed it in a drawer next to my lease, my voter registration card, and a copy of the fraud complaint. 3 documents that proved I existed outside of their shadow. That Saturday, Nina dragged me to a community yoga class. I didn't want to go. My body felt like a coat someone else had worn too long. But I went. We sat next to a woman named Sheila who ran a nonprofit for women recovering from financial abuse. I told her a little about what was going on, just enough to test the air. She nodded slowly. "You're not alone, you know. It's just that women like us were raised to keep quiet. Smile. Keep the family peace even when it breaks us." I didn't know if I wanted to cry or hug her. Maybe both. That night, I posted something vague on my own page. Just a quote. "Sometimes protecting your peace means upsetting theirs." I didn't check for likes. I just needed to say it, out loud, to the universe. By the time May arrived, I stopped responding to group texts from the extended family. I didn't need to hear about brunches I wasn't invited to. And I definitely didn't need to be looped into a conversation about who was bringing what to the Mother's Day picnic. It hurt. Of course it did, but it hurt less than pretending. I started journaling every night. Not for court, not for public statements, just for me. Small entries like, "Today I chose silence over argument," or "Nina made soup." It was good. Every so often I'd look at the case file Melanie had built. Dozens of pages now. Emails, notarized statements, copies of the mortgage contract, all with my name on them, none with my consent. This wasn't a phase. This was a reckoning. I wasn't going to let shame rewrite my story. I wasn't the prodigal daughter. I was the one who stayed, who paid bills, who picked up every emotional receipt and decided enough. And if they needed a villain to make their story easier to swallow, so be it. The courtroom was silent save for the creak of wooden benches and the faint scratching of pens against paper. I sat at the plaintiff's table, hands folded in my lap, my palms dry for the first time in months. My lawyer, Melanie Shaw, leaned slightly toward me, not saying a word, but her presence was steadying like a lighthouse in fog. When the judge read the verdict, I didn't cry. The court finds in favor of the plaintiff. The mortgage contract is declared void. Damages in the amount of $97,400 are to be paid to Ms. Rachel Morgan for incurred financial and emotional losses. My parents didn't flinch, not when the word void was said, not when their names were officially linked to fraud in public record. Dad adjusted his cufflink. Mom blinked slowly like she hadn't slept. Maybe she hadn't. I wasn't there to make sure anymore. Outside the courthouse, Portland felt too bright, like the sun hadn't gotten the memo that something had ended. Melanie handed me the envelope. Thick. Real. I didn't open it yet. She placed a hand on my shoulder and said, "It's done. You did what most people couldn't." That's when Nina appeared, sliding between camera crews and family friends, trying not to look curious. Her hug was sudden tight and smelled like lilacs and coffee. She didn't ask how I felt. She knew better. 2 hours later, we sat at the Blue Door Cafe. I'd been here before first dates, work lunches, a birthday brunch with my mom once. The table we chose had a small chip in the corner and faced the street. My phone buzzed. "Aunt Claire, proud of you. Don't let the noise in the pews drown out the truth." I smiled. So Nina asked, stirring her iced tea, "What now? Do you keep the house rented out? Remodel it?" I shook my head slowly. "I'm selling it." She blinked. "Really?" After all that isn't what I want to carry with me. It wasn't about the house anymore. It hadn't been for weeks. Owning something born from betrayal didn't feel like justice. It felt like dragging an anchor through sand, hoping it would bloom. The brunch came blueberry pancakes, eggs over medium, and a mug of chamomile tea I hadn't ordered but drank anyway. The taste was soft, warm, and nothing like the bitterness of legalese and notarized wounds. When I got home, I opened the envelope. The check was heavier in meaning than in weight. Behind it was another envelope, thinner, handwritten, and addressed in familiar cursive. My cousin Emma, 17 years old. She'd slipped it to Nina at the baby shower last month. Inside, "I want to be like you when I grow up. Not because you sued, but because you didn't stay quiet. I think that's what real adults do." I sat with that letter for a long while. No tears. Just the quiet of a room that belonged to me. Fully legally, finally. That night, I opened my laptop and pulled up Google Maps. I didn't know where I was headed. I just typed road trip and let the pin fall somewhere in California Sunshine Cliffs and miles between who I was and who I was becoming. There would be no applause, no public recognition, just the whisper of tires on asphalt and the clink of coffee mugs in roadside diners. Maybe I didn't win a house, but I got something better, the right to walk away without asking for permission. I didn't walk away with the house, but I walked away with myself. Whole, undivided, and no longer asking anyone's permission to live the life that's mine. Sometimes, the ties we call family can feel more like chains when they tighten in the name of love. Not everyone who shares your blood knows how to protect your heart, but if you speak the truth, even when your voice shakes, freedom will always find you quietly and completely. If this story touched something in you, feel free to share your thoughts below. Someone out there might need to hear the words you've been holding back.